Now let's cover the principle of least privilege, which is a very important concept to understand for the professional data engineer exam and working in cloud in general. Consider a situation where a developer has privileged access to the dev, sit, and prod environments. In this development workflow, they would push code to the dev environment. Then once tests pass, the code would be pushed to sit, and once additional tests pass, the code would be pushed to prod. That's how it should work normally. But again, our developer has access to all three of these environments. So let's say one day the developer accidentally specifies the prod environment first instead of the dev environment. Because he or she does have access to the prod environment, the push happens, the code gets sent directly to prod without tests occurring, and because the tests didn't occur, this breaks the prod environment. When users' applications or systems have more permissions than necessary, they can inadvertently or maliciously perform actions that compromise the security, integrity, and confidentiality of the system. This is one of the risks of overprivileged access. Additionally, an attacker who successfully hacks a low-level user account could exploit unnecessary permissions to cause more damage than they otherwise would have been able to. Consider an example where a user is given read-write access to BigQuery, Cloud SQL, Dataflow, Cloud Run, Cloud Storage, and App Engine. But they actually only use BigQuery, Cloud SQL, and Dataflow. If a hacker is able to unlock their account and hijack it, then the hacker would suddenly have access to not just the few services that they actually use, BigQuery, Cloud SQL, and Dataflow, but the other services as well. So the blast radius of a hack is larger as a result of this overprivileged access, again showing how overprivileged access is a security risk. Consider another scenario where a user has access to only a couple of services. You might think that's secure, but notice how one of them is Cloud IAM, which literally controls access. So if a hacker breaks into this account, he or she could use the access to Cloud IAM to give themselves access to other stuff, basically anything. This is called privilege escalation. It's another risk of overprivileged access. So, how do we mitigate these risks? A big part of the solution is following the principle of least privilege. This is my wording of it, but basically the principle of least privilege is as follows. Always allocate the minimum necessary permissions for someone or a service account to do what it needs. Depending on your tolerance for role maintenance, usually this involves either custom roles or predefined roles. This approach is simple. Only give the exact permissions required and nothing more. If a service account needs access to read data from BigQuery, it doesn't need permissions to modify or delete resources. By minimizing the granted permissions, you reduce the chance of unauthorized actions or security breaches. The goal is to keep your environment secure by ensuring that each account or service account just has enough access to do its job. No more, no less. Let's look at some of the key benefits of this approach. First, as I said earlier, it reduces the blast radius of compromised accounts. By granting only the necessary permissions, we limit the potential damage if an account is breached. Second, it helps to mitigate the risk of insider threats. So when users have only the access that they need, it reduces the likelihood that they can misuse other resources. Third, it lowers the chances of accidents. Less access means fewer opportunities for users or systems to make mistakes, such as deleting critical data or resources. And finally, it leads to simplified compliance and auditing. By giving out only the essential permissions, you'll have a clearer, more manageable record for audits and compliance checks. In short, this principle, the principle of least privilege, makes your environment safer, more controlled, and easier to manage. It will also almost definitely be tested on the exam in some way, so make sure that you know it. There's our explanation of the principle of least privilege.